So I'm going to start off for SOL3 by talking about the TED Talk. So basically, during the TED Talk, it talked about the importance of a safe classroom, and it also incorporated how a lot of students have hard lives, and when they come to school, this is essentially their safe spot, which is why it's important for us to instill a safe classroom. However, it can be difficult because students bring all their burdens and stressors from home and can act up and become angry, so it's important for us as educators to be understanding of that, while still making sure we keep a safe classroom for the rest of our kids, and then also be able to reprimand them and correct their behaviors in a safe, productive way. And one way of doing this is simply by stating, I see the good in you, and I know the good in you. However, you're not portraying this good to us right now, and I know you're better than that. So basically, that's kind of what the TED Talk was about. And it was a big takeaway for me because I know in that situation when the little boy was coming up to her with scissors, she could have freaked out, but instead she said, I know the good in you, because she understood his life and how much he's conquered, and handled it in a different way than most teachers would. She also made a comment how, unfortunately, the schools that need the most experienced teachers are not getting the most experienced teachers. Instead, they're getting the most inexperienced teachers, because that's all the school will really hire, because the more experienced teachers are choosing to work in more rural, nicer schools. So I'm going to go on and talk about how an issue a lot of teachers see in their classrooms is how their students are bringing their stressors and sadness and issues from home into the classroom, and it's in turn affecting their behavior. So one productive way of addressing these out of school factors and returning a sense of control to the student behavior is to view them at their behaviors as a distal setting events. So a setting event is a circumstance or occasion that makes an antecedent more likely to happen. And we know that antecedent is the action that happens before the behavior. So the first step is to identify and define distal setting events hypothesized to affect a student's behavior. Once potential distal setting is addressed and identified, a system must be put in place to identify when they have occurred. So then step 2 would be, once relevant and distal settings and events have been identified and defined, the next step is to collect data on the presence of the events and their occasion with changes in a student's challenging behavior. So basically how the two correlate, the behavior and then the distal setting. And then third is to analyze distal setting event patterns, so data and patterns, to conduct like student behavior on days when the setting event has occurred and then versus days when this has not occurred. So then step 4 is using the data to select setting event intervention strategies. So once the hypothesis has been developed regarding how a distal setting event may affect a student's disruptive behavior, the classroom team can begin to identify possible intervention strategies to use when the event has occurred. For instance, like if they figured a student didn't get a lot of sleep, they might have breaks in the day and do stretches and stuff like that. So then 5, you need to implement distal setting event strategies with fidelity. This effective strategies for improving implementation include sharing information with relevant members, listening and incorporating others' input into the behavior plan, and deciding on plan for implementation, including who's going to be responsible for implementing each aspect of the plan. And then we also need to collect data on implementation. And finally, creating strategy cheat sheets, a breakdown of the plan into simple terms and measures. So basically, this step is just like organizing the implementation we want to use and how we're going to go about it. And then finally, we need to monitor our practice in addressing distal setting events in the classroom. We need to see if our strategies are working, or we need to modify them to increase effectiveness or try something different. So now I'm going to talk about specified functions and how this is seen in, it's just like another behavior issue in the classroom. And so when behaviors are happening, the specified functions include, and these are like the reasons why these behaviors might be happening. They want to access an item or activity, they want attention from others, escape from a task or attention, or automatic reinforcement. When a teacher understands why an individual is engaging in challenging behaviors, and then they're going to be best fit to report and fix the actual challenging behavior, maybe replace it with a functional replacement. For instance, if a kid is hitting for attention, they can teach that kid, okay, well, maybe let's tell jokes instead. Which, I mean, I really like this idea of just actually like replacing the behavior and just becoming aware of why the child's doing this behavior so we can change it and find, if they want attention, then the joke would be the perfect solution to replace hitting. So the FBA is a key component for developing the behavior intervention plan, which we call BIP. It is, as well as like helping with the IEP, it just creates behavior goals and objectives. So once we understand the behavior, like I said, we are going to be able to correct the behavior more, and it is important to understand the functions, which is why functional analysis can help, because once you know the reasons for why a child is acting out, then you'll be able to help better discuss like interventions for this. So I actually really like this and like the process it takes to correct a behavior, and I definitely plan on taking this into my classroom, because if you just kind of break up a student's behavior, and if a child's constantly doing the same behavior, and figure out why this child is doing that behavior, you're going to be able to correct this behavior potentially permanently, which is really interesting, especially with like not only general education students, but especially with like children with disabilities, because a lot of times their anger just keeps building up and building up if they can't communicate what they actually want to communicate. So this might be why we're saying this, and this connects to motivating operations. What is motivating this child to do this behavior? For instance, if a child is hungry and they start acting out, the more hungry they are, the more they're going to act up. So basically for IOL 3, I found it really interesting just to like be weary and cautious of what students are really going through, and oftentimes it's more than we understand. So if we go to the initial problem, the initial thing that's causing the behavior, we're going to be more effectively be able to correct this behavior. So this was all a lot of new news for me. I like have heard of like obviously finding the root of the problem and working from there, but I didn't know specific methods to do that, and so I'm excited to apply this.